Chapter 1. The Wedding Waltz. Pete Duran had always believed that weddings were organized chaos dressed in satin and lace. Today was no exception. The ballroom of the Grand Magnolia Hotel shimmered under crystal chandeliers, and Pete stood in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, looking like the calm eye of a hurricane. "Pete, the florist just called," Sarah Johnson announced, striding toward him with her usual brisk determination. Her dark hair was swept into a practical bun, and her green eyes flashed like warning lights. "They're stuck in traffic." Again, Pete grinned, the kind of grin that had gotten him out of trouble since they were 12. "Relax, Sarah. We've got time. The ceremony doesn't start for another hour." Sarah huffed, crossing her arms. "An hour is nothing when you're missing half the centerpieces." Pete tilted his head, amused. "You know, most people would call this a minor hiccup. You call it a catastrophe." "Because it is," she shot back, her voice sharp but her cheeks pink. "You're too calm about everything. That's why we work so well together," Pete said, his tone teasing. "You panic, I soothe. Yin and yang." Sarah rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth twitched. He noticed, he always noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, he scanned the room, checking off details. The bride's family was milling about, the groom's party laughing near the bar, and the photographer was snapping candids like a sniper. Everything was under control. Until she walked in. Pete saw her before Sarah did, a tall brunette in a scarlet dress that clung like a second skin. She had confidence in her stride and a smile that said she was used to getting what she wanted. Pete barely had time to register her before she was standing in front of him. "Hi," she purred, her voice smooth as silk. "You're the wedding planner, right?" Pete nodded politely. "That's me." "Well, you're doing an amazing job," she said, her gaze sweeping over him like he was part of the decor. "And you look incredible in that suit." Pete chuckled lightly, the kind of laugh that deflected without encouraging. "Thanks. Appreciate that." Sarah appeared at his side like a storm cloud rolling in. Her eyes narrowed, and Pete could practically feel the temperature drop. "Pete," she said, her voice tight, "we need to check the seating chart." "Of course," Pete replied, but the brunette wasn't done. "Maybe after the wedding," she said, leaning closer. "You and I could grab a drink." Pete didn't miss the flare in Sarah's eyes, bright, sharp, and dangerous. He'd seen that look before, usually when someone tried to cut in front of her at the coffee shop. This was worse. This was personal. Pete smiled, slow and deliberate, and gently slid his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "I appreciate the offer," he said to the brunette, "but I'm already spoken for." The woman blinked, surprise flickering across her face before she recovered with a graceful nod. "Lucky girl," she said, and walked away without another word. Pete felt Sarah go rigid under his arm. When the brunette disappeared into the crowd, he dropped his arm and turned to Sarah, grinning like a kid who'd just stolen the last cookie. "You okay?" Sarah stared at him, speechless. Her brain had apparently short-circuited, and Pete found it adorable. He'd seen her handle bridezillas, screaming vendors, and last-minute disasters without breaking a sweat. But one random woman hitting on him, that had knocked her off her axis. "Why did you?" she started, then stopped, her voice strangled. Pete shrugged, his grin widening. Seemed like the easiest way to handle it. Sarah blinked, still processing, and Pete fought the urge to laugh. He loved this. Loved watching her struggle with emotions she tried so hard to hide. It was like watching a cat pretend it didn't care about the laser pointer. Before she could recover, a waiter approached with a tray of champagne flutes. Pete grabbed two and handed one to Sarah. "Drink," he said lightly. "You look like you need it." She took the glass, muttering something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like a curse. Pete clinked his glass against hers, his eyes dancing. "To surviving another wedding." Sarah managed a weak smile. "To surviving," she echoed, and took a long sip. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the ballroom was a graveyard of confetti and empty glasses, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear. Her mom's voice crackled through the line, warm and familiar. "So," her mom said, "how was the wedding?" "Fine," Sarah replied, picking at a napkin. "Except for this woman." Her mom chuckled. "What woman?" "This woman who hit on Pete," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Right in front of me." "Oh." Her mom's tone was amused now. "And what did Pete do?" Sarah hesitated. "He told her he was spoken for." There was a pause, then a laugh that rang like a bell. "Well, that's something." "Mom," Sarah groaned, "don't start." "I'm just saying," her mom said, her voice turning sly. "Pete's a handsome man with a good job and no criminal record. And most importantly, he's single." Sarah closed her eyes, dread curling in her stomach. "Mom, if you don't tell him how you feel," her mom continued, "someone else will. And next time, he might not say no." The words hit like a punch. Sarah gripped the phone, panic clawing at her chest. She'd always assumed Pete would be there. Always hers, even if only in the quiet corners of her heart. But what if her mom was right? What if one day, Pete didn't turn the other woman down? "Sarah," her mom said gently, "you've loved that boy since you were 15. Don't let stubbornness ruin your chance." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I'll think about it." "You do that," her mom said, and hung up, leaving Sarah alone with her racing thoughts. Across town, Pete sat on his porch, phone in hand, talking to his own mother. The night was cool, and the stars were sharp against the dark sky. "So," his mom said, "I heard about the woman at the wedding." Pete chuckled. "News travels fast. Stop playing with her heart. Pete, his mom said, her voice firm. Just tell Sarah you love her. Pete sighed, running a hand through his hair. I want to. More than anything. Then why don't you? Because, Pete said softly, if Sarah doesn't make the first move, I'll never know if she really wants me. Or if she's just saying yes because of our history. I need it to be more than that. His mom was quiet for a moment. You love her. With everything I have, Pete said, his voice steady. But if she can't make that little jump, I can't risk it. I'm playing for keeps. His mom sighed. You're as stubborn as she is. Pete smiled faintly. Guess that's why we fit. He hung up, staring at the stars, and wondered how long he could keep waiting. Chapter 2. Operation Confession. Sarah Johnson was not a coward. She'd faced down furious brides, demanding mothers-in-law, and one unforgettable incident involving a runaway llama at a rustic barn wedding. But confessing her feelings to Pete Duran? That was a whole different battlefield. She sat cross-legged on her couch, laptop open, a blank document glaring at her like an accusation. The title read, Operation Confession. Because if she was going to do this, she needed a plan, a real plan, not the half-baked fantasies she'd been nursing since high school. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Pete. Pete, tomorrow's wedding is going to be a circus. You ready, partner? Sarah stared at the screen, her heart doing somersaults. Partner. He always called her that. It was sweet and infuriating all at once. She typed back, Sarah, always. You bring the calm, I'll bring the panic. His reply came seconds later. Pete, deal. See you at 9. Don't forget your coffee armor. Sarah smiled despite herself. Coffee armor. He knew her too well. She closed the chat and turned back to her laptop. Focus, Sarah. Her mom's words echoed in her head. If you don't tell him how you feel, someone else will. The image of the scarlet dress woman flashed like a warning sign. Sarah shuddered. No, she wasn't going to let that happen. Step 1. The setting, Sarah typed furiously. Confession must happen in a neutral zone. Not at a wedding, too much chaos. Not at work, too many distractions. Somewhere calm, private, but not too romantic or Hill suspect to set up. She paused, chewing her lip. Coffee shop, too public. Her apartment, too intimate. His porch, maybe, but what if his mom showed up? She deleted the last line and sighed. Neutral zone TBD. Step 2. The approach, start casual. Ease into it. No blurting out, I love you, like a rom-com heroine hopped up on champagne. Build up. Compliment him. Laugh. Then slide into the truth. Sarah groaned. Slide into the truth? What was this, a PowerPoint presentation? She deleted the phrase and typed. Just be honest. But not weird. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her best friend from college, Jenna. Jenna. So, rumor has it you almost murdered a woman at a wedding? Sarah rolled her eyes and typed back. Sarah, I didn't murder anyone. Pete handled it. Jenna, handled it how? Sarah hesitated, then typed. Sarah. He told her he was spoken for, and put his arm around me. There was a long pause. Then Jenna's reply exploded onto the screen. Jenna what? Girl, that's basically a declaration. Why are you still sitting on your feelings? Sarah flopped back against the couch, groaning. Because I'm stubborn and terrified and possibly insane, she thought. But she typed. Sarah, working on it. Jenna, work faster. Before Scarlet Dress comes back for round 2. Sarah tossed her phone aside and stared at her laptop. Jenna was right. Everyone was right. She had to do this. Soon. The brainstorm spiral. 2 hours later, Sarah's document looked like the scribblings of a conspiracy theorist. Bullet points, arrows, and phrases like, mention childhood memories, and don't cry unless he cries first, littered the page. She imagined Pete's face when she told him. Would he smile that slow, devastating smile? Would he laugh? Would he say nothing? The thought made her stomach twist. What if she ruined everything? What if he didn't feel the same? Except she knew he did. She wasn't blind. The way he looked at her sometimes, soft, amused, like she was his favorite puzzle. The way he always made sure she ate during wedding chaos, sneaking her hors d'oeuvres when she forgot lunch. The way he'd wrapped his arm around her today, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sarah closed her eyes, heart pounding. He loves you. You love him. Stop overthinking and do it. Enter the moms. The next morning, Sarah was halfway through her first coffee when her mom called. She answered reluctantly. Morning, sweetheart, her mom chirped. Big wedding today? Yeah, Sarah said, sipping her coffee. It's going to be a long one. Well, don't forget what we talked about, her mom said, her tone sly. Men like Pete don't stay single forever. Sarah groaned. Mom, I'm serious, her mom interrupted. You've been in love with that boy for half your life. If you don't tell him, someone else will. Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. I know. Then do something about it, her mom said, and hung up before Sarah could argue. Sarah stared at her phone, muttering, easy for you to say. Across town, Pete was having a similar conversation with his own mother. Peter Duran, she said sternly, stop dragging this out. Just tell Sarah you love her. Pete sighed, adjusting his tie. Mom, it's not that simple. It is, she insisted. You've loved that girl since you were kids. I know, Pete said quietly. But if she doesn't make the first move, I'll never know if she really wants me. Or if she's just saying yes because of our history. I need it to be more than that. His mom huffed. You're as stubborn as she is. Pete smiled faintly. Guess that's why we fit. The wedding chaos. By noon, Sarah was knee-deep in floral arrangements and seating charts. Pete moved through the chaos like a calm breeze, checking details, soothing nerves. Sarah watched him from across the room, her heart aching. She had to tell him. Soon. Maybe tonight, after the wedding. She'd invite him for coffee, or maybe dinner. Casual, but not too casual. She rehearsed lines in her head as she adjusted table settings. Pete, there's something I need to tell you. No, that sounds like a breakup. Pete, I've been thinking. Ugh, no. Too vague. She was so lost in thought she didn't notice Pete walking up until he was right beside her. You okay? He asked, his voice warm. Sarah jumped. What? Yeah, fine. Pete raised an eyebrow. You look like you're plotting world domination. Sarah forced a laugh. Just making sure everything's perfect. Pete smiled, slow and teasing. You always do. Her heart flipped. She opened her mouth, maybe to say something, maybe to chicken out, but the DJ blasted music and the bride appeared, and the moment was gone. Late night resolve. By the time the wedding ended, Sarah was exhausted. She collapsed on her couch, heels kicked off, hair falling loose. Her laptop still sat on the coffee table, Operation Confession glowing like a dare. She stared at it, then grabbed her phone and typed a message to Pete. Sarah, hey, tomorrow night, dinner? My treat. She hovered over the send button, pulse racing. Then she hit send before she could lose her nerve. Seconds later, his reply popped up. Pete, dinner sounds great. Looking forward to it. Sarah exhaled, a shaky smile spreading across her face. Step 1, complete. Tomorrow, she'd tell him. No more plans, no more panic. Just the truth. She closed her laptop and whispered to herself, game on. Chapter 3. Dinner and Dilemmas. Sarah Johnson had spent the entire day rehearsing lines in her head. By the time she pulled into the parking lot of La Belle Bistro, she had 20 different versions of her confession ready, and hated all of them. She sat in her car for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel like it was a lifeline. You can do this, she told herself. You've survived bridezillas. You've survived llamas. You can survive telling Pete you love him. Her phone buzzed. A text from Pete. Pete, I'm inside. Got us a table by the window. No llamas in sight. Sarah laughed despite her nerves. Leave it to Pete to make her smile when she felt like throwing up. She grabbed her purse, checked her lipstick in the rearview mirror, and walked inside. The setup, Pete was already seated, looking annoyingly perfect in a navy button-down that made his eyes even bluer. He stood when he saw her, his smile slow and warm, the kind of smile that made her knees wobble. Hey, he said, pulling out her chair like a gentleman from an old movie. You look great. Sarah managed to smile. Thanks. You too. She sat, trying not to notice how close his hand brushed hers when he pushed in the chair. The restaurant was cozy, all soft lighting and quiet chatter. Perfect for a confession. Or a meltdown. Pete handed her a menu. Hope you're hungry. Starving, Sarah lied. Her stomach was doing cartwheels. They ordered steak for him, pasta for her, and settled into easy conversation about the wedding they'd just finished. Pete teased her about her panic face, and Sarah threw a breadstick at him, laughing. For a moment, it felt like any other night. Safe. Comfortable. But tonight wasn't supposed to be safe. The first attempt, halfway through dinner, Sarah decided to go for it. She set down her fork, took a deep breath, and said, Pete, there's something I need to tell you. Pete looked up, eyebrows raised, his expression open and curious. Okay, shoot. Sarah froze. Her brain, traitorous as ever, went blank. All her rehearsed lines evaporated like steam. She stared at him, words stuck in her throat. She stammered. You have spinach in your teeth. Pete blinked, then laughed, a deep, warm laugh that made her want to crawl under the table. Seriously? Sarah nodded, mortified. Just a little. Pete grinned, grabbed his napkin, and wiped his teeth. Better. Perfect, Sarah muttered, wishing the floor would swallow her whole. Pete's counterattack. Pete leaned back, studying her with that amused look she hated and loved. You've been weird all night, he said lightly. What's going on? Sarah's pulse spiked. Weird? I'm not weird. You're definitely weird, Pete said, his grin widening. You've got that plotting face. Sarah scowled. I do not have a plotting face. You do, Pete said, chuckling. I've known you since you were 8. That's the same face you had when you stole my bike. Sarah laughed despite herself. You deserved it. Probably, Pete said, his eyes softening. So what's the plot this time? Sarah swallowed hard. Tell him. Just tell him. But before she could speak, the waiter appeared with dessert menus, and the moment slipped away like sand through her fingers. The dessert delay, Pete ordered chocolate mousse. Sarah ordered tiramisu, mostly because her brain was too fried to make decisions. When the waiter left, Pete leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. You know, he said casually, my mom asked about you today. Sarah blinked. Your mom? Yeah, Pete said, his tone teasing. She wanted to know why we're not married yet. Sarah choked on air. What? Pete laughed, eyes dancing. Relax. She was joking. Mostly. Sarah stared at him, heart pounding. And what did you say? Pete shrugged, his smile turning softer. I told her we're complicated. Sarah's breath caught. Complicated. Pete nodded slowly. You're stubborn. I'm stubborn. Makes things interesting. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. Was he hinting? Was this her opening? She gripped her fork like a weapon and said, Pete. But then the waiter returned with dessert, and the moment shattered again. The almost confession, they ate in silence for a few minutes, the air thick with unspoken words. Sarah's mind screamed at her, do it now, before you chicken out again. She set down her fork, wiped her hands, and looked at him. Pete, she said, her voice steady this time. Her phone buzzed. Loud. Obnoxious. She glanced down and saw a text from Jenna. Jenna, tell him or I'm driving over there and doing it for you. Sarah groaned, shoving the phone face down. Pete raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? Fine, Sarah said through gritted teeth. Just my friend being dramatic. Pete smiled faintly. Sounds familiar. Sarah laughed weakly, then took a deep breath. Pete, listen. I've been thinking. Pete's gaze locked on hers, blue and steady. Yeah. Sarah opened her mouth, and the restaurant lights flickered, then went out completely. The blackout curveball, gasps rippled through the room. Someone cursed. A waiter appeared with a flashlight, announcing, Sorry, folks. Power outage. We'll have it back soon. Sarah sat frozen, her confession swallowed by darkness. Pete chuckled softly. Well, that's romantic. Sarah laughed, shaky. Yeah, perfect timing. Pete reached across the table, his hand brushing hers in the dim glow of emergency lights. You okay? Sarah nodded, her heart pounding so hard she thought he could hear it. His fingers lingered on hers, warm and steady, and for a moment, the world narrowed to that single touch. She could say it now. She could whisper it in the dark, let the words slip out like a secret. But her throat locked, and the moment passed. The ride home. By the time the lights came back, Sarah had lost her nerve completely. Pete paid the bill, and they walked out into the cool night air. He offered to drive her home, and she accepted, because saying no felt impossible. The car ride was quiet, filled with the hum of tires and the weight of everything unsaid. Sarah stared out the window, her mind a storm. When they pulled up to her apartment, Pete turned to her, his expression unreadable. Thanks for dinner, he said softly. I had a great time. Sarah forced a smile. Me too. Pete hesitated, like he wanted to say more. Then he just smiled. That slow, devastating smile, and said, Good night, Sarah. Good night, she whispered, and watched him drive away, her heart aching. Late night resolve, round 2. Inside her apartment, Sarah collapsed on the couch, groaning. She grabbed her phone and texted Jenna. Sarah, I failed. Jenna, what? How? Sarah, blackout. Panic. Life hates me. Jenna, girl. Tomorrow. No excuses. Sarah stared at the screen, then typed, Sarah, tomorrow. She tossed the phone aside, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself. Next time, I swear. Chapter 4. Breaking point. Pete Duran was patient. He'd waited years for Sarah Johnson to figure out what he already knew, that they belonged together. But patience had its limits, and tonight, Pete felt every single one of them. He stood in the kitchen of his apartment, staring at his phone. Sarah had texted earlier. Sarah, tomorrow's wedding is going to be wild. Brace yourself. Pete had replied with his usual calm humor, but inside, he was restless. Dinner last night had been something. She'd been nervous, distracted, like she was carrying a secret too heavy for her to hold. He'd almost asked, but then the blackout happened, and the moment slipped away. Pete wasn't letting another moment slip. The decision, he poured himself a glass of water, leaning against the counter. His mom's voice echoed in his head. Stop playing with her heart. Just tell her you love her. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But he needed to know she was all in. Not just saying yes because of nostalgia or family expectations. He needed her to choose him, fully and freely. Still, if she wouldn't jump, maybe he could nudge. Pete grabbed his phone and typed, Pete, after tomorrow's wedding, come by my place. No excuses. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Seconds later, her reply popped up. Sarah, okay. Everything okay? Pete smiled faintly. Pete, everything's fine. Just need to talk. The wedding chaos, again. The next day was a blur of flowers, vows, and frantic last-minute fixes. Sarah was her usual whirlwind, efficient, sharp, stubborn as ever. Pete watched her from across the ballroom, his chest tightening. She was beautiful when she worked, all fire and focus. He loved that about her. He loved everything about her. And tonight, he was done waiting. The invitation, by the time they finished cleanup, Sarah was exhausted. Pete offered her a ride, and she accepted without hesitation. The car ride was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Pete's hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. When they pulled up to his building, Sarah frowned. Pete, why are we here? Because, Pete said calmly, I told you to come by. Sarah blinked. I thought you meant after I went home. Pete smiled, slow and deliberate. Nope. Now. He led her upstairs, his heart pounding, but his expression steady. Sarah followed, looking equal parts curious and nervous. The confrontation, Pete's apartment was warm and inviting, all soft lamplight and clean lines. He gestured for her to sit on the couch. She did, clutching her purse like a shield. Pete, she said cautiously, what's going on? Pete sat across from her, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on hers. Sarah, we've been dancing around something for a long time. Her breath hitched. What do you mean? Pete leaned forward, his voice low and steady. You've been acting strange. Dinner last night. You were about to say something. Then you didn't. Sarah's cheeks flushed. Pete held up a hand. Let me finish. She nodded, silent. I've known you since we were kids, Pete said softly. I know when you're hiding something, and I think I know what it is. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Pete. Pete's gaze was unwavering. You love me. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sarah froze, her brain short-circuiting. I what? Pete smiled faintly, but his eyes were serious. You love me. You've loved me for years. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's bold. Pete chuckled. It's true. Sarah swallowed hard. And if it is? Pete's voice softened, but his tone was firm. Then say it. The push, Sarah stared at him, panic and longing warring inside her. Pete, this isn't complicated, he finished for her. It's not. You love me. I love you. Her breath caught. You love me. Pete nodded, his expression steady. With everything I have. Sarah's throat tightened. Tears burned behind her eyes. Then why didn't you? Because, Pete said gently, I needed to know you were sure. I needed you to choose me, not just fall into it because everyone expects us to. Sarah blinked, stunned. Pete. He reached out, his hand covering hers, warm and solid. So I'm asking you, Sarah. No games. No plans. Do you love me? The breaking point, Sarah's heart felt like it might burst. All her fears, all her stubbornness, all her carefully built walls crumbled under the weight of his words. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw everything she'd ever wanted. Yes, she whispered. Her voice shook, but the truth was clear. I love you. Pete's smile was slow, devastating, and full of relief. Finally, Sarah laughed through her tears, half hysterical, half euphoric. You're impossible. And you're stubborn, Pete said, his thumb brushing her knuckles. But I love that about you. Sarah shook her head, laughing harder now. Our parents are going to lose their minds. Pete grinned. Pretty sure there's a betting pool. Sarah gaped. What? Pete chuckled. My mom hinted. Odds were on me breaking first. Sarah groaned. Figures. Pete squeezed her hand, his voice soft. Doesn't matter who broke first. What matters is we're here. Sarah's chest ached with joy. Yeah, she whispered. We're here. The kiss. Pete stood, pulling her up with him. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the air thick with years of unspoken feelings. Then Pete cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle but sure. Sarah, he murmured, I've loved you since you stole my bike. Sarah laughed, tears spilling over. You deserved it. Pete smiled and kissed her. It was soft at first, then deep, then everything. Years of friendship, years of longing, years of stubborn silence melting into one perfect moment. Sarah clung to him, her heart soaring. When they finally broke apart, breathless and grinning, Pete rested his forehead against hers. Worth the wait. Sarah laughed, her voice shaky. Definitely. The aftermath, they collapsed onto the couch, tangled together, laughing like kids. Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. No more plans. No more panic. Just them. Pete brushed a strand of hair from her face, his eyes warm. So what now? Sarah smiled. Now? We tell our parents before they bankrupt themselves on that betting pool. Pete laughed, pulling her close. Deal. Chapter 5. The Great Reveal. Sarah Johnson had faced many terrifying moments in her life, like the time a bride's veil caught fire during a candlelit ceremony. But nothing compared to walking into her parents' living room with Pete Duran's hand firmly clasped in hers. Her mom looked up from the couch, eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting prey. Well, she said slowly, setting down her tea. What do we have here? Sarah swallowed hard. Hi, Mom. Pete smiled, calm as ever. Evening, Mrs. Johnson. Her mom's gaze dropped to their joined hands, then shot back up, her grin spreading like wildfire. Finally, Sarah groaned. Mom, don't mom me, she said, standing and calling toward the kitchen. Honey, get in here. It happened. Sarah's dad appeared, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He took one look at them and grinned. About time. Sarah buried her face in her free hand. Oh my God. Pete chuckled softly, squeezing her fingers. Told you this would be fun. The Johnson family interrogation, her mom practically shoved them onto the couch. Sit. Tell me everything. Sarah opened her mouth, but her mom steamrolled ahead. Who confessed first? Was it romantic? Did anyone cry? Sarah sputtered. Mom. Pete grinned. She confessed. Sarah whipped her head toward him. Pete. What? He said innocently. You did. Her mom clapped her hands like a kid on Christmas. I knew it. I told your father Sarah would break first. Sarah froze. Wait, what? Her dad smirked. Your mom had $50 on you. Sarah blinked. $50? Her mom waved a hand. Don't act shocked. There's a pool. Sarah stared. A pool. Pete chuckled. Told you. Sarah turned on him. You knew? Pete shrugged, looking far too amused. My mom hinted. Sarah gaped. Your mom's in on this too? Oh, sweetheart, her mom said, patting her knee. Both families are in on it. Been running for years. Sarah groaned, collapsing against Pete's shoulder. I hate everyone. Pete laughed, wrapping an arm around her. You love me. Sarah muttered, unfortunately. Enter the Durans. As if on cue, Pete's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and grinned. Speak of the devil. Sarah peeked. Your mom. Yep, Pete said, answering. Hey, Mom. Her voice rang loud enough for Sarah to hear. Peter Duran, did you win me my money? Pete chuckled. Depends. How much did you bet? 200, his mom said proudly. On you breaking first. Pete smirked. Sorry to disappoint. Sarah confessed. There was a beat of silence, then a dramatic gasp. She confessed. Sarah groaned. Kill me now. Pete's mom laughed like a villain. Well, I guess I owe your father $50. Pete grinned. Sounds like you're not the only one. Oh, honey, his mom said slyly. You have no idea? This pool is legendary. The full scope of madness. 10 minutes later, both families were on a group video call, faces filling the screen like a chaotic sitcom. Sarah sat wedged against Pete, trying to disappear into the couch as her mom waved a notebook triumphantly. "Here's the list," she announced. "Everyone's bets." Sarah squinted. "Is that laminated?" "Of course," her mom said. "This is serious business." Pete leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. "Wow. My uncle bet on Christmas Eve 2 years ago." Her dad chuckled. He was optimistic. Sarah scanned the page, horrified. "You had dates. Dates, scenarios, even dialogue," her mom said proudly. "Your aunt thought Pete would propose during a wedding toast." Pete laughed. "Not a bad guess." Sarah groaned. "You're all insane." Pete kissed her temple. "Adorable, but insane." The victory lap. Her mom cleared her throat dramatically. "Now, as the official winner." Sarah echoed. "Yes," her mom said smugly. "I bet you'd confess first." "And you did." Sarah threw her hands up. "This is humiliating." Pete grinned. "I think it's hilarious." His mom chimed in. "Peter, you owe me dinner for losing." Pete smirked. "Fine, but Sarah's paying." Sarah elbowed him. "Traitor." The toast. Eventually, the chaos settled into laughter and teasing. Both moms raised glasses of wine on camera. "To stubborn love," Sarah's mom declared. "To finally getting our money's worth," Pete's mom added. Sarah buried her face in Pete's shoulder, laughing helplessly. "We're never living this down." Pete kissed her hair, his voice low and warm. "Don't want to." Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze. And in that moment, surrounded by family, bets, and ridiculous love, she realized she didn't either. The epilogue vibe. Later that night, after the calls ended and the apartment was quiet, Sarah curled against Pete on the couch. He traced lazy circles on her hand, his smile soft. "So," he murmured, "what's next?" Sarah grinned. "We tell everyone the pool's closed." Pete chuckled. "Or we start a new one." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "On what?" Pete's grin turned wicked. "Wedding date." Sarah laughed, swatting his arm. "You're impossible. And you love me," he said, kissing her slow and sweet. Sarah sighed against his lips, smiling. "Unfortunately." Epilogue. The wedding they didn't plan. Pete Duran had planned hundreds of weddings in his life. He'd handled bridezillas, last-minute disasters, and even a llama incident. But nothing, compared to planning his own wedding with Sarah Johnson. Correction, trying to plan his own wedding with Sarah Johnson. "Pete," Sarah said, standing in the middle of the reception hall 2 weeks before the big day, hands on her hips, eyes blazing. "We are not having a donut wall." Pete grinned, leaning against a table. "Why not? Everyone loves donuts." "This is a wedding, not a police station," Sarah shot back. Pete chuckled. "You're adorable when you're bossy." Sarah glared. "I'm not bossy. I'm organized." "Sure," Pete said, his grin widening. "And stubborn." Sarah threw a napkin at him. "You're impossible. And you love me," Pete said, catching the napkin midair. Sarah muttered, "Unfortunately," but her smile gave her away. The big day, 2 weeks later, the Grand Magnolia Hotel glittered under chandeliers, just like the first wedding that started it all. Only this time, Sarah wasn't running around with a clipboard. She was standing in front of a mirror in a white dress that made Pete's heart stop. She stared at her reflection, nerves buzzing like static. Her mom fussed with her veil, grinning like a cat with cream. "You look perfect," her mom said. "Pete's going to faint." Sarah laughed shakily. "He better not." Her mom winked. "If he does, I'll prop him up." Sarah rolled her eyes, but warmth bloomed in her chest. Today wasn't just a wedding. It was the end of years of stubborn silence and the start of everything she'd ever wanted. Pete's side of things, across the hall, Pete adjusted his tie for the 10th time. His dad smirked from the doorway. Nervous. Pete grinned. Not even a little. His dad raised an eyebrow. "You've been staring at that tie for 20 minutes. Pete chuckled. "Just making sure it's perfect." His mom appeared, holding a small envelope. "Before you go," she said, handing it to him. "You should see this." Pete opened it and burst out laughing. Inside was the laminated betting pool sheet, now marked with a giant red stamp. "Closed," Sarah confessed first. Pete shook his head, grinning. "You're all ridiculous." His mom kissed his cheek. "And you're happy." Pete smiled softly. "Happiest I've ever been." The ceremony, the music swelled. Guests turned as Sarah walked down the aisle, radiant and steady, her eyes locked on Pete. He felt his chest tighten, his breath catch. She was everything. His best friend, his partner, his forever. When she reached him, Pete whispered, "You're stunning." Sarah smiled, her voice low. "You're not fainting." "Not yet," Pete teased. The officiant cleared their throat, and the ceremony began. Vows were exchanged, simple, heartfelt, and full of laughter. "I promise," Pete said, his voice steady, "to love you even when you're stubborn." Sarah grinned. "And I promise to love you even when you think donut walls are a good idea." The guests laughed. Pete kissed her hand, his eyes shining. "Deal." The reception chaos. Hours later, the reception was in full swing. Music, laughter, clinking glasses, and, yes, a donut wall. Sarah had caved. Pete considered it his first official victory as a husband. Sarah stood near the dance floor, chatting with Jenna, when Pete appeared behind her, sliding an arm around her waist. "Mrs. Duran," he murmured, his voice warm, "care to dance?" Sarah turned, smiling. "Thought you'd never ask." They moved to the center of the floor, swaying to a slow song. Pete held her close, his chin resting on her hair. "You know," he said softly, "this is the first wedding I've ever enjoyed." Sarah laughed. Because you didn't have to plan it. Pete grinned. Because I get to leave with the bride. The betting pool toast. Halfway through the night, Pete's mom clinked a glass, calling for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced. Before we toast the happy couple, we have an important matter to settle. Sarah groaned. Oh no. Her mom appeared beside Pete's mom, holding the laminated sheet like a trophy. As you all know, there's been a long-standing bet on who would confess first. The crowd erupted in laughter. Sarah buried her face in Pete's shoulder. Kill me now. Pete chuckled, kissing her hair. Too late. His mom raised her glass. To Sarah, for finally breaking first, and to Pete, for waiting her out. The room cheered. Sarah lifted her head, laughing helplessly. We're never living this down. Pete grinned. Don't want to. The last dance, as the night wound down, Pete and Sarah slipped outside to the quiet garden, away from the noise. Fairy lights twinkled overhead, and the air was cool and sweet. Pete pulled her close, his voice low. So, Mrs. Duran. Sarah smiled, resting her head on his chest. Mr. Duran. Worth the wait, he asked. Sarah looked up, her eyes shining. Every second. Pete kissed her, slow and deep, sealing the promise they'd made years ago without words. No more stubborn silence. No more waiting. Just them, forever.